Hello there, and welcome to the Polly Podcast. My name is Torkel, and the written versions of these episodes can be found in the blog over at Pollyverse.com. So, today's episode, the fourth episode of Polly Podcast, is getting a little bit political. So, strap your boots on, get ready. I know they say don't get political, but we're getting political. You may have remembered from last episode, I'm actually catching up on blog posts because I posted these blog posts earlier than the podcast episodes. So this is actually going back into the past a little bit because I wrote this directly after I voted in the West Australia state election. I'm going to mainly be reading off what I wrote so that I don't just babble on into a very long political, unthought through opinion. Because I think I wrote something that fits nicely here after I voted. I was feeling passionate because politics, as boring as it may sound, is a big part of my hobbies. I really like reading about politics around the world, in Australia. And I don't know, I just became fascinated with it, probably during my time in England mainly, because I was living in England during Brexit. So it sort of became impossible not to be involved with it during that time when there was so much media going on about it. It was in shops, it was everywhere. So yeah, this isn't going to be me telling you what to do or anything like that. It's just maybe some healthy and helpful perspectives about voting. If you're unsure about voting, unsure how to go about things, how to even get started with having a political opinion, hopefully this might help you out. I'm not going to go down a vegan rant rabbit hole or anything like that. So don't fear. I'm just going to talk things through a little because we all are entitled to a vote, which is awesome for a democracy. You don't want to be restricted from voting in a democracy, obviously. So whether you choose not to vote or whether you choose to vote, it's helpful to know what are the possibilities to vote for. What are the possibilities that you're missing out on if you aren't voting? So then you can have an informed decision either way, basically. And I'm not going to tell you what each party does because it changes, from election to election. But, generally there is like rules to it, but I'll go over all that in some detail. Speaking of which, the West Australia state elections were crazy. It was a Labor landslide, which was obviously people wanted that because people voted for that. It's incredible. And it was mainly because of the great response to COVID that we've had as a state and the leadership that Labor has shown as the leaders of our state. So that was cool to see. And that's how that all went down. I didn't know that at the time of writing this, by the way. Not that that matters to the post, I don't think. But yeah, so let's get into this. I'm just going to find a nice point to read from here. If you've ever had a conversation with me about politics, then you will know how stubborn and passionate I can get talking about each issue. I mean, I can go into comment threads on Facebook, on YouTube. I can get stuck into it all. It doesn't really bother me or burn me out for some reason. I'm a little bit insane like that. But I don't really have something in particular about politics that I want to talk about today. Just sort of it as a whole and each of our individual interactions with it. So, all that being said, I really do encourage everyone who cares about their city, their state, their country, or just society in general to at least look into the different political parties through unbiased sources and see what they each stand for. Because sometimes literally just a Wikipedia search is often enough to get a good baseline idea on each party or person that's available for your vote. And I understand that this is super overwhelming to a lot of people and that we're kept pretty busy and distracted from even simple thoughts and decisions like those at times. But at the very least, look into where your vote could go for your kids, for the marginalized or minority members of your community, the teachers and doctors that aren't getting the wages or benefits that they want, people who need it more than you. Like maybe you don't, maybe it doesn't really affect you who gets into power. Maybe you're lucky enough to be in that position. So, I kind of am, to be honest. But don't waste your vote for selfish reasons. And don't vote for a party that does next to nothing and then bashes other parties for threatening to do something. That's something hard to notice, but that is something to keep in mind. Don't become subject to the venomous bias of various news media outlets or your friends who have already fallen into those traps. So that's sort of getting into... I feel like I need to preface this. I don't know if I actually do need to preface these parts. I'm reading it from the blog post, but that's sort of going into the idea of propaganda in news media, outlets that are perpetuating stories that benefit them as an organization. This all sounds quite dramatic, but it is very subtle in day-to-day life. And I don't blame the people close to me who have made what I perceive to be irrational points about political topics. So I know I have at times. I know that they have heard it from somewhere else, as have I. We all get our opinions from somewhere. We all form our decisions based on something in the past. It's called learning. But hopefully you got to be open to change, and you got to be wary of things like the backfire effect. This is going a little off script now, but that's something interesting to look up, the backfire effect. It's important to reflect on yourself in order to improve yourself, I think. And it's important to listen to other people, even if you think they're wrong, and to not feel that everything is an attack against you, because most of the time it probably isn't. It is with that criticism of self and of information from prejudiced sources that you can derive some original opinions. Yeah. Now, this is not to say that you should be questioning everything from the 5G network to the flu vaccines and completely trusting an anonymous Q character on the internet who tells you to support a violent racist. So, obviously there's some things where it's like, what is this company's reason for putting out this information, and is it accurate, and do they have a stake in it? And then going from that, is it actually information, or is it from a perspective, or is it unbiased? Is it factual? Are they leaving out details? Sometimes it's good to check multiple sources and things like that. I feel like I'm prefacing this all too much. Probably don't need to. You probably understand. But what I recommend is establishing a general baseline, first of all, of what is important to you and how you interact with the world, and then applying that framework to the deciphering of political agendas, making sure as to not get bogged down in topics that require more reading or research unless you have the time for it. So a general kind of baseline that I use for myself is that I want equal opportunities for all people, no matter where they were born or who they are. And so what that might translate to politically is access to education, to water, food, shelter, fair work, immigration, things like that. And another baseline that I care for is the preservation of the earth, obviously, and the reduction of suffering. So there's my climate change and vegan points. I had to slip them in there somewhere. And what this translates to politically is quite a lot of things. In a broad sense, climate change policies like renewable energy, recycling, sustainable materials and foods, and prevention of violence, physical or mental abuse against each other and animals, forced labor, and abusive conditions in the workplace. Also assistance for those struggling without a job or with any disorders or disabilities, and assistance for those who are socially marginalized for their race or gender or status. So that's sort of my baseline and how I've applied it to policies, like the sort of policies that I look for that support those ideas, those morals or values, I guess. So it's important, I think, to think about what is actually important to you in this world. Individually, what might be important to you, but then what is important for you in a societal sense? How do you want to interact with the world, and what do you want other people to get out of this world, not just yourself as well? You got to sort of tie it all together. And then through voting is obviously how you can help influence the world that you want. And all of these thoughts can go further and further into real life policy examples, but that would be a lot to listen to, honestly. So simply by establishing for yourself your own baseline of morals will help you to apply it to the world of politics and help you to understand how your community is affected by each party or personal decision. Voting is not the be-all and end-all, though. That's good to keep in mind. In my mind, the easiest way to have a very direct impact on society... In my mind, it is the easiest way to have a very direct impact on society, because it's like, you only have to go out of your way once or twice a year, or actually less than that. I don't even know how often you get to vote, but it's not very often, maybe once a year at most. And so it's an easy way to have some impact on the world and to have a say. But it's not the be-all and end-all. There are other great things to do, such as speaking to local politicians, something you can do. They do actually listen. You can email them and ask them questions to get a sort of a read on what their perspectives are and what their values are. You can also attend protests that are relevant to your own values. And you can help your own community through direct action in the ways that you value, whether that's by volunteering, giving to charity, working in public office, or working in any field that you think benefits your community. Our everyday actions are kind of political in a sense. So it's important to, I don't know, if you're not a nihilist, then you kind of want to live in a good world, don't you? Things like considering where your products are purchased, how they were made, and redirecting your funds to more ethical choices, if that's what you happen to align with. If you're not some sort of a nihilist who hates everything and wants everything to be trash. So yeah, pretty short one today. Random little thing. There's definitely going to be future podcasts about political topics for sure. I guarantee it. I can write endlessly about it, and I have written endlessly about it. I've got a few documents about different things in my files on the computer. But that's all I want to say today. It was just a little thing about voting and how I see voting as not necessarily getting involved in politics, because a lot of people have an aversion to politics in general. They want to stay apolitical because it's complicated and it's heated, and they might feel attacked during discussions with other people, especially if they don't if they haven't read into it yet, so they might not know as much as the other person. But sort of everything is political nowadays, you know? Everything that we do has some sort of effect on the world. Like I said, what products you purchase. If you're buying clothing from like a cheap company that uses textile factories in impoverished nations that underpay their employees, if you're buying food products that were also the same thing in impoverished nations where corporations exploited those workers for minimal pay to get those products to you for a cheap cost, then by purchasing those, you are supporting those things. And it's good to just be aware of that so then you can make your own decision about it. So there's a lot of politics in day-to-day life that people don't necessarily think about. But voting isn't the be-all and end-all. It's just an easy way to have an effect on it. So that's all I want to really say. Thank you for listening to today's episode. And hopefully I will see you in next week's one. Ta-ta until then.